Key Aero, your aviation destination.
Yeah, that's why, in fact, it was such an unusual way to do it. You can't do what I did these days. That's why I wrote the two books. They're separate books. The first book is how I got into aviation, and that's called The Self-Improver, because that's quite a derogatory term in aviation, self-improver. And that was back in the 70s and the 80s. If you couldn't get sponsored by an airline, you weren't a military pilot, then the only other way of doing it was by doing a self-improver route, and that was doing your private pilot's license, then doing hours building, then getting your instructor's license, and try and get up to 900 hours, and then take your commercial licenses. And so the first book is about how I did that, because I didn't want to particularly go into aviation. My parents were in, my father was in aviation, two uncles were in the RAF. So it was almost kind of expected of me to go into aviation, and I was a bit of a rebellious sort of guy. I was much happier on my windsurfer and going off to play rugby and driving fast cars. And so that was the story. That's how it started. That I didn't want to do it. And my very first medical, I failed. So there was almost no chance of doing it. Then I went to university, and I went away on a 2-week trip with my father. It was down to South America. He was flying 707s with British Caledonia. And I had such a good time in those 2 weeks down in Rio. I thought, maybe I could do this as well. I was in my late 20s, I was running this company, and British Airways came along and said, would you like a job? And I said, well, yeah, I would, but only on the 747. So I went and did their interviews with them, and then they offered me the job, and they said, we'll give you a 737. I don't want that. And I said, might as well ask. And they said, no, we don't employ on the 747. I said, okay, in that case, I'm not interested. And that was in 1987, when being part of BA was the pinnacle of any pilot's career. And the actual chief pilot rang me back and said, have you turned us down? And I said, well, yeah, I have. He said, why? I said, well, when I spoke to you originally, I wanted 747. I don't want to fly 73. And he said, no, we couldn't have offered you that. I said, well, if you go and speak to your personnel manager, that's what they said. And he rang me back about 3 hours later and he said, yeah, he did say that, didn't he? He said, yeah, all right then, you can have the 747. And so I started flying the 747 in 1987. And I flew it continuously for 34 years. It was the first time they were recruiting what they called direct entry pilots, because before British Airways had always put people through handball, through the training schools. They'd go to short haul, then they'd go on to long haul. And they decided that they didn't have enough people coming through, so they would recruit directly. And because I was a training captain, I did all my training qualifications on the 125 and the 111. Then that qualified. I had enough jet hours to go straight in. And I wasn't the only one. There were a few of us that go on 777, all from other airlines. I think I was the only self-improver there, not from another airline. There was a little bit of disgruntled pilots around who'd been waiting years to go on the jumbo. So I was very lucky. I mean, I was so lucky. The pilots before me had taken 22 years in the right-hand seat to get to a jumbo left-hand seat. And I joined in 87, and 8.5 years later, I was a captain on 747. So it was luck. Yeah, I won't sort of gloss over it, there was a lot of animosity. But again, it was luck, because I was on the Classic. When I joined, there was only the Classic, the original jumbo. And in 1991, 92, I think it was, the 747-400 came in. And they had all the extra long-haul routes, and that's where all the premium payments were. So all of the senior co-pilots bidded to become co-pilots on the 400s because they'd get more money than captains on the old Classic. So I put in a bid, not really expecting it. I'd only been flying it for 8 years. And then suddenly I found myself, you've been accepted as a captain. What started off with the book, when the as you know, COVID, they grounded the whole of the 747 fleet. And it gave me the first time, literally since I was 17, 18, to reflect on what I'd been doing. And a researcher called me up. In fact, he was, his father was a 747 captain. This researcher had decided to find out who was the longest serving, most experienced 747 pilot in the world. And he came up with his father. And he was about to publish an article. And then he did some more research and he came up with me. And he said, he rang me up, I said, I haven't done my research. I said, no. He said, when did you start flying the 747? I said, early in 1987. You could see him go, oh, bugger. He said, well, yeah, it's a year before my father. He said, I'll send you all my research. He said, you've actually been flying it longer than anybody else in the world. And of course, nobody else is going to fly it as long now because there's just cargo airlines left. So it's very unlikely that anyone's going to do 34 years.
Had it ever crossed your mind that you might actually be the most experienced?
Not really. No, it's not the sort of thing. You know, on your day-to-day working, you don't really think. I know that the only time that I was thinking about going onto another aircraft was when Concorde were recruiting. So I put an application in, and that was going through. But then, of course, Paris happened, and I in some ways, I'm quite glad I stayed on the jumbo. It was just a lovely airplane. I looked at these new airplanes. The 777 came in, and that didn't appeal to me. The jumbo it's just a lovely airplane. I mean, I've started flying a 777, but if something goes wrong on the 777 or a twin-engine airplane, you have to do something. On the jumbo, if something went wrong, you went, okay, let's carry on. And that was it. You just carried on. You looked at it, yeah, okay, well, yeah, I lost an engine a few times, we lost some hydraulic systems, but there was always another 3 or another 4 systems. So, you could literally get airborne out of London, lose an engine and carry on to Singapore. It was possible. Whereas, if you have an engine failure on a modern aeroplane, then it really is an emergency situation. So it was just a very nice way of flying, if I put it that way. Well, of course, the big difference is the 100. British Airways never operated the 300. We just did the 100 and 200, then the 4. Of course, the 1 and 200s had the flight engineer, and that they were wonderful. I think that was the best way to operate an airplane: the captain, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer. That I think was the safest, nicest way. But without doubt, the 400 was the best airplane. I mean, it's almost like when they built the 100, there were quite a few problems with it. It was underpowered. It wasn't a terribly nice airplane to fly. It was okay, but it wasn't the best. And then they seemed to listen. Boeing listened to the pilots, and then they built the 200. 200 was a wonderful airplane. They fixed all of the problems that they had on the 100. And then they went from the 200 to the 400. And then they'd listen to the pilots again, because apart from losing the flight engineer, which I really did miss, even now when I'm in simulator and things go wrong, I turn around to look for the flight engineer, of course. It's replaced by a cup holder now. So I do miss that. But no, the 400 is just lovely. It just does everything it says it should. It's not too automated. You can, with 2 clicks of a button, you're flying a PA-28 again. Everything you do goes straight through the controls to you actually fly in the airplane. You disconnect the pilot, disconnect the throttle, and it's you. Where fly-by-wire airplanes, you don't have that. Whatever you do, as I'm sure you know, your movements go to a computer. The computer then decides to tell the flight controls what to do. So it's not as rewarding flying the 777. When I first started to fly the jumbo over in Shannon, we had to do base training actually at the airport, where now everything's done. I did a 777 course, and the first time I'd actually been on the 777, literally, as a passenger, was when I flew it. I wasn't quite, I used to go, where's the flight deck? Where are the stairs? No, it's that way, okay, sorry. Because it was just so different. But in the old days, we had to go and fly the aeroplane. And there was again, I put it in a little bit to you, there's an amusing story of me trying to fly it at Shannon and tailwinds and high winds. Because the jumbo, when it's very light, is quite a handful. It's normally taking off at 380 tons. And if you're trying to fly it at 220 tons, then all the power settings you've learned, everything else become a little bit obsolete. So that's quite fun. There was one about shutting an engine down halfway across the Atlantic because I got this message from from flight ops, and it was almost like, almost what happened. They sent me the wrong message because I'd agreed to I was ferrying this airplane down back to Heathrow, and I'd agreed to do a 4-engine takeoff, shut the engine down, which had an oil problem, and then restart it the landing. No passengers on board. And halfway up the climb, after coming out of Miami, they said, "Don't shut the engine down." And of course I was furious because I wouldn't have taken the airplane. And then halfway across the Atlantic, the engine ran out of oil, so we had to shut the engine down. We had to do a 3-engine landing in really bad weather in Miami. And I went up to see the flight manager, and his name, this is absolutely true, his name was Doug Diss, D-I-S-S. And the message sent to me was, "Captain Doug Diss agrees with your intentions to shut the engine down." So what he meant to say is that, because he sort of sent a message to Nick, Captain Doug disagrees. Of course, it came out as disagrees. So I got this message saying, "Don't shut the engine down." That's ridiculous. So that was amusing. I ended up seeing him in his office, and he was very apologetic. We both laughed about it. He was very apologetic. BA had a plan to retire them in 2024. And if COVID hadn't come along, that's what they would have done, because we still had about 40, I think 39, 40 747. So they couldn't, they knew they were retiring. At one point we had 59, so they'd retired 19 already. But I'm due to retire this year anyway, so I knew that 747 was going to see me out. So I was more than happy to stay on there. And just because we have a bid line system, so we can bid for the trips we like. So I used to go to Cape Town every month and do some kite surfing and wine tasting. So a very pleasant lifestyle. So yeah, it was a big shock when they closed the fleet down early. But I was on the Classic when 9/11 happened, and we were sitting in Bombay, in Mumbai, in the executive lounge in the hotel, and myself, the co-pilot, the engineer, we were sitting having a beer, and on the television behind me there was 9/11. It was literally the news, and next to us were American businessmen. They were based in the North Tower, and they started to stand up and shout at the TV. I thought, why are they shouting at the TV? It's a film. You can see it's a film. It's just make-believe. And the engineer sat there like this, and he said, "The world will change. I'll never fly again. We'll fly home, and I'll never fly again." And he was right. We were met at Heathrow by a manager saying, "I'm sorry guys, we're grounding the whole fleet. Just go home and wait for us to call you." And of course that was the end of the career for all the flight engineers. They never flew again. So it happened to me twice in my career. Twice they grounded the fleet I was on. So, but this time it's much closer to my retirement. So.
But it was a bit frustrating though, wasn't it, I suppose? Because it would have been nice to finish on the 747, wouldn't it, I suppose?
It would be, but in reality, there's a lot of people a lot worse off than myself. No way do I feel sorry for myself. Yeah, it would have been nice, but it's given me the chance to write the 2 books. I'm doing a 3rd one at the moment. So it's given me a chance to do something different. And every career comes to an end. So it goes very quickly. You'll be surprised. I can't believe it's only when you look back and realise how quickly your career just has gone. It happens to everybody, I'm sure. But yeah. So no, I'm not sad. That's life, isn't it?